Hey, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us here today. For the sake of time, we're actually going to go ahead and jump into things. We'll also send the recording hereafter. So if you missed the first couple of minutes, no sweat. We've got a lot of content to get through today. So going to go ahead and jump right into the agenda and introductions. So my name is Sean Barry. I'm on the sales team here at NetRise. I live outside of Philadelphia, and I'm joined by my partner in crime here, Brian Taylor. Brian, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey guys, Brian Taylor. Nice to meet you. I'm the Senior Director of Solutions Engineering here at NetRise for the Globe. So looking forward to digging into this Salt Typhoon webinar and having a discussion with Sean.
Absolutely. So what we want to try and cover today is give everyone a bit of a primer on what Salt Typhoon is, do a bit of a root compliance analysis on it, and then get into what we take as the kind of the path ahead, just reading between the tea leaves, if you will, and a couple of takeaways at the end. So hopefully we'll give everyone a better idea of something that's still ongoing and also gives an idea of what's to come in terms of more kind of software supply chain risk. So moving along, what we first figured we would do is just kind of give a 30,000 foot view of what Salt Typhoon is. So Brian, why don't you go ahead and give a little bit of an overview of what we're looking at here today?
Yeah, so Salt Typhoon is a PRC nation state hacking group, APT, who targets supply chain, software supply chain specifically, and focuses on the telecommunications sector. They are part of a larger group of Chinese nation state affiliated teams, including Silk Typhoon, who's also another supply chain actor, and Volt Typhoon, who went after U.S. national critical infrastructure. And that's a whole nother topic. We'll be covering those in future webinar series. So basically what these guys did is they, over a long period of time, some say it goes back as far as 2019, 2020. Most of the materials out there are, 2022 is when people think the first intrusions happened. But they weren't detected. They were in stealth for 18 months to 2 years. So they weren't detected until 2024. And nothing really started happening until later 2024 and early 2025 of this year. So what they did is they came in, they used a bunch of different vectors, the main one being weak and stolen credentials that they were able to crack. They targeted old networking infrastructure, such as, Cisco switches that were running, vulnerabilities that were 5+ years old, had, known exploitable vulnerabilities on them, had end of life software that they could target. And they didn't really use any, novel 0-day type attacks. It was all known stuff that was out there. So they used that to infiltrate our telecom system. They infiltrated over 8 of the biggest telecoms, including a lot of these ones you see on this screen, all of the ones you see on this screen. And they used those vectors on the left to do it, right? So it wasn't just Cisco, it was other legacy equipment that they had in their environment. And they used this to basically tap in and take over all of the telecom calls. They broke into the US intercept system that we use as part of the FISA courts to do monitoring on Americans and anyone on those networks. And they got access to that kind of global aggregator that, distributes all of those or pulls in all of those call recordings from the different, companies. And then they were able to access all of that data. So they were able to listen in on the presidential campaigns of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. They were able to listen in on their top advisors. They were able to listen on anyone they wanted, all Americans. And that data is not going away, right? They are storing that data. And for some type of use, what that is, I'm not sure yet. I can speculate. But yeah, Sean, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, you're totally good. I think that's a good overview and good summary. I think there's a lot of plenty of literature and reads on it at this point in time, but what we want to do is give everyone kind of the primer on it all because it's still ongoing. And I think, one of the most concerning things from my perspective is it's state-backed, long-running campaign, and it's still ongoing. It's happening daily, even today. So, and that's why, this issue is actually something that's bipartisan in terms of trying to get to the both the root cause of everything as well as putting a solution against it so it doesn't happen again. And that's where at the bottom here you see and then for those of us in cyber, now I think generally everyone knows Mark Warner is pretty pro cyber and outspoken on certain topics, and he called this the worst telecom hack in our nation's history. And I think he went on to say something along the lines of like any of the other kind of like previous kind of like Russian state sponsored attacks or like merely paltry in comparison to this. So that kind of gives you a rough order of magnitude to kind of compare against. So, that's Salt Typhoon at a high level of detail there. Maybe moving along here, one of the things we wanted to talk about is kind of where this all started, right? And I like to think that, everything starts at the beginning. And, with the proliferation of software, software eating the world, it all comes back to when these applications were written, many, many years ago, and then how software has kind of evolved and how fast and hard software has gone since then in terms of like rollout and whatnot. And I think this is one of those scenarios where the cart's kind of gotten away from the horse, and now we're essentially paying for it in a number of different ways. So, I know you talked a little bit about the detail on it earlier, Brian, but do you want to kind of get a little bit more into the weeds here in terms of some of like the compliance aspects of it, and then of course even some of the specifics on this, this is like a cross section of CVEs you see here, folks, but just exactly how everything went down.
Yeah, some of the CVEs they use, I mean, a lot of this has to do with what I believe is the lack of compliance in these industries, and it's not just telecom. And what's interesting is we're seeing a lot of these, new compliance come out with CALEA's update and Secure Communications Act and the CISA guidance for telecom. But really, it's not just telecom; it's networking, because networking provides all of the underlying hardware for telecom. So, in order to really secure telecom truly, you can't just secure telecom; you have to secure networking. So if you look at industries like medical or automotive, they've had compliance since 2018. The FDA requires that you triage every vulnerability. They require that you remove end of life software, that you triage known exploitable vulnerabilities, right? These types of things that are just kind of basic fundamental proxy security, cybersecurity principles that telecom networking don't have. And when those guardrails, look, I'm not saying that compliance makes things more secure by default. I'm saying that it's the impetus that drives things like building product security teams and creating a more secure, CI/CD process and all these operations around it, which really turn into how do we have a better visibility into the risk. And without that, companies are just going to build and release software as fast as they can because profit is king. So while that's happening, security will get sacrificed and security will take a back seat. So, what we want to explore here is not just, hey, there's all these vectors that are known that really should have been patched and should have been fixed, in any reasonable security practitioner's mind. We're talking 5+ year-old vulnerabilities. We're talking CVSS scores of 10 or higher. We're talking about, like ability to gain root access, like very severe vectors. But when you don't have compliance saying, hey, you need to look at those things, why would you? You can just release your software and focus on profit. What happens though?
Go ahead. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off there.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah. I mean, I think it's been said before that compliance regulations, forget the exact quote, is written in blood. And if you mentioned a couple of those critical industries, medical device as well as automotive. I mean, one of the interesting kind of correlations there is security is a lot more connected to safety in those realms than security is to, for example, telecom infrastructure or other kinds of, consumer product type goods, right? But at the end of the day, when it is your, PII or your data or matters of national intelligence in this case, you could actually connect. Like there is a direct connection there. It just hasn't been made yet. So I think that's where we're going to get to in a little bit. But a lot of the kind of like compliance or regulations type stuff is making its way into this world, which is a great. It's great that it's happening, and hopefully it provides companies a compelling event to basically start to deliver more safe and secure software, and patch much faster, and look at some of how they've architected their processes or their systems, or even their products to provide that extra safety mechanism, if you will. So
yeah, and so just to cover the vectors themselves really quickly, what they did, I know I've mentioned at a high level kind of what's going on, but what they did was basically they used stolen credentials, to get access. Then they used old vulnerabilities to escalate privileges and to move laterally. And then they use, living off the land techniques, lol bins, things like that, to use known good tools that continue to move, gather intel, and escalate privileges. They also deployed some like backdoors, like Ghost, I think it was Ghost Spider, and used some rats like Deed Rat. So there were some like remote access Trojans and things like that that helped them maintain persistent access. But overall, none of this, as I said, were 0 days. There was no new novel threats here. This is all known bad that they use and exploited. So that's kind of what they did. They also did, once they were in there, they started doing spear phishing to move laterally, where they would actually target certain users and to move across departments or into new verticals. And at these massive telecom companies, not everyone knows everyone. They've got thousands, tens of thousands, lots of employees. And so it's kind of hard you get an email from someone that looks like it's known good because they've cracked that account over there. How do you know? Your spam filter's not going to catch it. It's internal only email, really. It's really tough to know that that's bad, right?
Yeah,
So
it feels like this, like the proportions or the scale has been weaponized against the obvious targets at the end of the day through these vectors. And I mean, it's interesting. You see this first CVE here. It's from 2018. I mean, that's a while ago. So it's been around for a long time, hanging out there in the ether, and they were able to discern that it was still exploitable and did just that. So and a lot of them are from the early 2020s. I mean, I guess we're kind of in the middle. I mean, we're at 2025 now, but I mean, they've just been around for a number of years, and I mean, who knows what other ones are being exploited that we don't have eyes on. So again,
exactly.
yeah, pretty interesting when you look at the methods here. So
Yeah.
if there's not anything more here, maybe we move along.
Yeah, one more item. So there's the one thing they did do, and this is an important point, is they spiderwebbed out to as many places as they could within each organization. Because what they wanted to do was become a new form of APT, not an advanced persistent threat, an advanced permanent threat. Right? They wanted to live in these environments forever. And guess what? They're succeeding. Right now, the word on the street is, in order to actually get China and PRC out of our telecoms and listening to every single call, every single unencrypted text message we do, we would have to burn down the infrastructure of the 3 largest telecoms in the United States, which obviously is not something we can do. So they are still in there right now. They are still active right now. And we only know what we've found. It's almost impossible to do a full root cause analysis, incident response analysis on an entire telecom network, let alone 8 plus telecom networks. So that's the other problem with not putting these, compliance and these cybersecurity guardrails in early, is they get the ability to just live, and never get pulled out.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate situation. I think a lot of what you mentioned there is it's public. It's out in the ether already. It's publicly available information. So you can read. There's a lot of articles on this, and yeah, it's scary. But at the end of the day, our job isn't to put our heads in the sands. It's to look at the problem and then try and address it and escalate the risk and put a solution in place. So that's a lot of what's going on. I think one other thing too that's worth taking a look at, and this is really actually based off of a case study that we did back in 2024, is just it kind of gets back into a couple of topics that are we've circled around, like secure by design, as well as just how hard and fast the software development lifecycle has gone for the various kind of reasons related to capitalism. But we did a study of a large data set of networking products and their firmware, and I think we took something over like 14,000 different firmwares and whatnot, and analyzed them. And on average, we found that there's well over 1,200 software components found in a networking switch. And of that, you can kind of see the drill down here. There's at that point in time, at least, there was well over 1,100 known CVEs, and of which 473 were critical. And then you can just read the rest of this, right? There's tons of things left behind in the open source, commercial, off the shelf, and proprietary software components used to create these products, right? So misconfigurations, vulnerabilities that are being weaponized, like some of the ones we just mentioned on the last slide, or at least reviewed. And then, of course, components that are just simply end of life, but still out there in the field, right, and haven't been updated. So there's tons of opportunity here to not only reduce risk, but even just from a software quality perspective, reduce at the end of the day bloat. So I think this is a big opportunity for some of the infrastructure providers, the OEMs, to basically start to integrate some safer, more secure design principles just from the jump. And then, of course, as they're looking to do like their patching process and whatnot, be able to drive something that's a little bit more effective for the end customer. So, any thoughts here, Brian?
No, I mean, I think you covered that pretty comprehensively. And these misconfigurations are things like encryption not enabled, services auto running with root at startup, right? Things like that. So they're very also big security holes that can be taken advantage of by an attacker.
And low-hanging fruit. These are really easy things to fix. So I know many OEMs already have these kind of in the crosshair, and hopefully we'll be able to see some of the, moving forward, a lot of this kind of be addressed. I'll, at the very end of the webinar here, I'll provide a QR code that will link people to this exact, report, and no sign up required. And you're more than happy to, or more than welcome to, I should say, read the whole thing in detail. I think it's not too hard of a read, or long of a read, I should say. So, moving on, we wanted to talk about the path forward here. So, Brian, I know you had done a lot of reading on kind of, the outcome of all of this, mostly on Capitol Hill or in DC. So do you want to kind of give us a rundown of what we're doing here domestically in relation to Salt Typhoon?
Yeah, definitely. So, one of the first things that came out was actually the CISA guidance, which is the second one on this list. There was some other stuff too as well, like the EFF posted some things, and there's other guidance out there, but these are kind of the most official ones from the federal government. So, CISA guidance came out, and that was all about basically hardening telecommunications infrastructure, and that was strengthening visibility, incident response, secure by design, and that was mainly targeted for network engineers, network monitors, and there's also even like Cisco specific guidance in there. So things like no default passwords, right? Basic, right? Using stronger encryption, doing continuous monitoring for vulnerabilities. So not just saying, hey, let me assess this at build time, but also saying, hey, let me assess this throughout that product's life cycle continuously, so that I know if I've shipped this product out to my customers and this new risk comes in, I can then notify them or take appropriate action and patch it at a faster rate, and therefore reduce that attack surface significantly. So those are kind of just some of the really broad, high level items that were included in the CISA guidance. I think that was a really good start. I think there's definitely other things they can learn from some of those other industries like medical and automotive. The FDA guidance is great. ISO 21434 is great. There's a lot of good stuff in there that I think they should be expanded. So I think they're kind of doing the broad strokes right now. So CALEA, I don't know if you're familiar with it. Basically, it's a 1994 Communications Act that had to do with, not allowing wiretaps to happen without proper without proper, warrants and things like that, right? Without some type of approval. So that's where kind of the FISA stuff came in, and they started doing all that with all those courts. Now they're kind of modifying it to say that you need to, harden cybersecurity wise all of your underlying infrastructure and secure it for those networks. So that's what the Secure Americans Communications Act is. It's basically tweaking that CALEA provision to now make it kind of more of a cybersecurity act, and kind of fix that failure to fully implement those security requirements from 1994. So if they'd fully implemented them, we might not have these problems today, because that system that was actually doing the wiretapping would be a lot more hardened. So that's kind of where we're at today. I'd like to see a lot more of this. As I mentioned earlier, this is really targeting telecom. I would like to see also corresponding legislation for networking, because networking and telecom are intrinsically linked, especially when you're talking about securing the infrastructure.
That's a good point. And I think it is, one of the things we can at least applaud here is that this is in general a step in the right direction. It's also bipartisan, and it's stretched across the kind of administration transition that we've had in the last year, right? And pictured here is we got kind of both Marks here, both Mark Warner and Marco Rubio, who's now obviously Department of State. But this is a picture actually from one of the hearings, I believe it was in December, where they were talking about this exact topic, right? Salt Typhoon and the various other typhoons that are going on. I think one of the things that's also worth pointing out here, and it's bottom right in our slide, is some of the international, call it compelling events as well. Many are probably familiar with the Cyber Resilience Act. There's also DORA, which is more focused on financial services, and NIS2. The reason we wanted to kind of nod to this is because these are actual also requirements in the European Union that dictate for both the OEM as well as the asset operator a number of different kind of like cyber requirements in terms of vulnerability reporting, continuous monitoring, patching, and then even reporting major vulnerabilities to the government authorities that over there in the EU, right? So I don't remember their names off the top of my head, but there's a couple of, I think it's CISA, but basically, for critical vulnerabilities, for example, there's a 48-hour window that actually OEMs have to provide notice to them as well as their end customers in terms of vulnerabilities, and then having like a way to patch things and fix things in place. So why this is brought up is because it is applicable to our domestic OEMs here. Some of the ones that I mentioned, if you're doing business in the EU, which is the second largest market in the world, I mean, no one can avoid that doing business over there. It's something that's functionally already applicable, right? So, and I know for the CRA, a large part of the requirements there does go into effect this December. So, we hope to see that, some of this stuff will have a kind of tailwind effect for us, but also maybe there's some things we can steal from this if relevant. So I think that kind of covers it in terms of some of the regulatory stuff that we wanted to talk about. Anything else on your end, Brian?
Oh, I think that's good.
Cool. So I wanted to kind of take a step back here and think about this in terms of what we've seen before. You can look at things like Log4j, which was pretty critical a few years ago, to obviously some of these Typhoon attacks now, and think about it in terms of like, if this has happened before, it's only going to happen again, right? What's past is prologue. Our good friend William Shakespeare had once said, right? So that's where, if you are an organization in either one of these camps, an OEM or an enterprise that's trying to secure its supply chain, we might be a solution for you. So, just a really quick as to what it is that we do here at NetRise before we kind of close things for the webinar here. So we do software supply chain security. It's pretty applicable for the various kind of use cases we walk through, but essentially we help folks that build and buy software at the end of the day better understand the risk associated with it, right? So, being able to generate a software bill of material from any sort of compiled software asset, understand the vulnerabilities and monitor for them that are associated with the SBOM, and then all this other kind of extraneous risk around, licenses or components that are end of life or end of service, or credentials, misconfigurations, some of the things we've already talked about. And this really helps drive a number of things. One, first, you create this foundation of a software inventory where you know exactly your exposure in terms of, all of your assets or all the things you're actually delivering to market if you're an OEM. But then, of course, it powers all these kind of modalities from third-party risk management all the way through, your internal kind of application or product security functions. So just want to put it out there. If anyone was interested in learning more about what it is that we do and what we uniquely bring to the market, happy to take you through that. Or if you just want to talk about Salt Typhoon, also very happy to talk about that as well. And I think maybe this is where we start to land the plane a little bit in terms of providing the audience here some takeaways. So maybe I'll start with the first one and we can have a chat about it. So, one of the things that we were talking about before we're coming into this is, this is a supply chain attack, and this is only going to grow. And if you actually read the 2025 Verizon DPIR report, I think it just came out. Supply chain attacks are up year over year, up to now 30% of all incidents, right? So it was 15% last year, 30% this year. Quite a dramatic growth there. And if you think about this, basically it's ever expanding. It's kind of like the universe, right? It's like with the proliferation of software, with more and more software being developed and being consumed and whatnot, this attack surface is only going to grow. Any thoughts there, Brian?
No, totally agree. And this is definitely a supply chain problem. As I mentioned, it's not just a one industry, right? It's multi-industry. So you're looking at not just what's my supply chain in telecom, but what's my supply chain outside of telecom. What am I buying? What am I building? How do I know what risk I'm introducing into my environment from both?
Absolutely. I think parlaying off of this, and we just talked about compliance is coming, and in some ways is already here, depending on how you want to look at it. So this is something that um, everyone should be thinking about. And you mentioned a couple of industries there: automotive, medical device. Those are great places to look for inspiration as to how to tackle this problem. There's obviously nuances in different verticals, but those are great places to see how they are approaching it, and by the way, are still very much profitable. So, um, compliance, it's going to provide a compelling event. It's on the horizon. And then I think the other thing, you can look at this a lot of different ways, but everyone is a target, whether you're a company or even a person at the end of the day. I mean, it's either, it's data of national security importance, it's data of personal importance, it's data from a company perspective that is being basically sought after and used for ulterior motives, and that's what we're up against here. So, any thoughts on that one, Brian?
Yeah, I just say that it's interesting that Arrington has already kicked off kind of the effort to eliminate RMF for DoD software. So if you look at kind of the federal government, just in what the trend of what they're doing, they're actually
Mhm.
starting to up some of their own compliance. So, and if that's, they're usually the trendsetter on that angle. So if they're starting to, do things like require software bill of materials over, the legacy RMF process, that's kind of a signal and an indicator that, this is where the industry is going. This is where the federal government's mindset is going. We're going to see a lot more of this in the future.
You're right. The U.S. government is the largest customer on the planet, and they carry a big stick because of that. So, them doing what Katie Arrington has already kind of done in terms of the RMF is pretty interesting and worth taking a look at as well, and something that people can internalize however they wish in their own organizations. So, um, I think that wraps it up in terms of the takeaways we want to provide it, and hopefully everyone here has gotten a bit of a primer on Salt Typhoon and whatnot. As I mentioned earlier, wanted to make sure you had the link, if you will, to the supply chain visibility and risk study that had all of the kind of networking stuff. So you can utilize this QR code. It should take you right there. And then finally, we also have Black Hat and DEF CON on the horizon here. So essentially, we're going to go have a really great presence there that week. I'm planning on being there. I think you'll be there, Brian, and certainly would love to engage with the community there. If you're going to be out there, please feel free to reach out. I think we're going to organize a couple of events, and we'll publicize those. So stay tuned. But thank you very much, and do follow us on LinkedIn, and we'll be sure to stay connected. So yeah, thank you very much, all. Have a great rest of your evening, and take care.
Thanks, y'all.